As the first panel mentioned, and as many of you in the audience know here, permitting transmission projects remains a major challenge. The complex permitting environment, which can include many governmental entities, creates lengthy timelines and adds to uncertainty for developers. This panel will examine common sense modifications and solutions to the permitting process and consider ways to expedite transmission projects while maintaining environmental protection considerations. I'll pass it off to our moderator, Janea Scott with Gridworks.
All right, thank you so much, Sarah. And thank you for inviting us to be here. We're delighted to spend a few minutes chatting with folks about how we unlock transmission development through permitting. I am Janea Scott, and I'm a senior fellow over at Gridworks. I'm also a partner at Caliber Strategies, and I'm really delighted to be joined here today by my excellent fellow panelist, James Lester, who is Senior Advisor on Transmission, Climate, and Energy in the Colorado Energy Office. And then to his right is Randall Luthi, Policy Director of the Wyoming Governor's Office. And then to his right and my immediate left is Brant Johnson, the Senior Vice President for Development at Grid United. So I'll kick us off with a little bit of scene setting, and then I'll ask folks some questions. But I went and I took the liberty of recrafting the panel description just a little bit, because we all know that transmission development remains one of the toughest challenges to achieving affordable, reliable, and abundant energy in the West. But many of the tools that we need to make real progress are already available under existing state and federal authorities. So today's conversation, our panel is going to focus not so much on permitting reform, but on using the frameworks that we already have and how do we use those more effectively and more collaboratively. And I'll point out that you heard from the panel right before us, and part of the reason this we think is so important is because we need this transmission now, not at an amorphous time when permitting reform might come. So we've got tools in our hands right now and that we can use. And so none of you need me to highlight the importance of modernizing our transmission infrastructure so that we're able to keep the lights on in the areas where reliability is of concern, and also capture the economic development that comes along with all of the things we're talking about, right? Data centers, electrification, AI, other future types of development. So with that, what I will do is turn it to James Lester from our Colorado Energy Office, and ask him to do a brief introduction, and then I have a first question for you.
Great. Thank you. Yes, thanks for having me. James Lester, Senior Advisor with the Energy Office. I've been with the office for a little over 2 years now. Prior to that, I was an advisor with our Public Utility Commission here. So I lead our transmission markets work throughout the state and basically throughout the West, representing Colorado. So that takes up probably more than half of my time, but then the rest of my time is really spent working on policy and legislation. And how I got into this area is where in 2024, our office, along with a variety of stakeholders, worked on a bill to improve siting and permitting throughout the state. That was Senate Bill 24212. And that went through a variety of versions and ultimately ended up passing with a few things. One, it provided the Department of Natural Resources with additional funding and to support local governments when it comes to wildlife, habitat, and clean energy projects. It also directed our office to develop, along with the Department of Local Affairs, DOLA, to work on a code repository of existing codes across the state and actually the nation that support the development of clean energy. And finally, and most recently, it instructed our office, along with DNR, to develop a report that kind of assesses the existing processes of siting and permitting across the state for clean energy projects and transmission. And that report was just finally released on October 1st. And I was kind of the lead author of that, along with my colleague from DNR, who focused on the wildlife section of that. But transmission, siting, and permitting was one of the legislative directives of that report that we had to address.
Great. And so based on that, I'm going to ask you about the work that you did on the siting report. And so based on the work of the siting report that was required, as you mentioned, by SB 2024, what'd you say, 212, right? Not
Correct.
212, 212. What did the state learn, or what has the state learned so far about specific steps that you can take today under existing authorities to advance transmission development in the West? And some examples could be early stakeholder engagement, community benefits agreements, things like that. So would love to hear a little bit more about the report.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, one of the main things that we heard, not only for transmission siting, but just clean energy products in general, is these are very complex applications that come before our local governments who have full siting authority in their jurisdictions. And many of them are overwhelmed with these applications. They don't quite have the staff and the resources to review and even sometimes update their codes to where they need to be. So what we've heard over the past few years is the need to provide additional support for our local governments, for the counties throughout the state. Another huge lesson is that, as we all know here in Colorado, it's a very diverse state, both geologically and politically. So what works in one county on the Eastern Plains is not going to work for the same county on the Western Slope. So that's an area that we really took to heart and learned a lot about, just, additional ways that we can support these local governments from a state perspective. So with that, we also learned, especially from all our stakeholders, is of the importance of early and meaningful community engagement early in the process. We've had some cases, we've been very, very successful here in Colorado in meeting our clean energy goals and getting a lot of clean energy projects built. However, things are, similar to across the country, things are starting to slow down a little bit. We're starting to see additional barriers. And in several cases, that was kind of initiated by the fact that a developer or utility did not conduct that early, meaningful stakeholder engagement. And so that's a lesson that we've learned through this process and will be a focus of ours moving forward.
Communicate early and often. I would like to introduce Randall Luthi from the Wyoming Governor's Office, and I'll let you do a brief intro as well, and then I'll ask you a first question.
All right. Thank you very much, Janea. And thank you all for the opportunity to be on this panel. As I looked at the resumes, what I see is transmission experts. I am not. So I hope to learn a lot from both of you, and thank you. And I am here largely because Troy has such great skills at bribery and intimidation and guilt. All right. So appreciate that, Troy. So glad to be here. So appreciate it. As I said, I am the policy director for Governor Mark Gordon of Wyoming. I've been policy director for just a little over a year. And before that time, I was energy advisor. As you might guess from the color of my hair, this is not my first job out of college, right? Yeah. I had the fortunate, I've been actually worked in Washington, D.C. a couple of times. The last time was actually for a, well, we can still use the word lobbying group, but it's for offshore energy, which again, that is immediately your first thought, right? A boy from Wyoming doing offshore energy. So, but what a great experience it was. With that, I've served in the state legislature in Wyoming long before there. And just been very fortunate to be working with Governor Gordon, as I said, for the last 6 years.
Excellent. And I appreciate you continuing our mob theme today, talking through bribery, intimidation, and guilt. So
that's what WGA does.
So, Randall, maybe talk to us a little bit about Wyoming's approach to development and what lessons can other states draw from your approach to balancing development, conservation, and public engagement?
All right, thank you. That's a big question, a lot to unpack, but I think I could do it in just a few minutes. One of which is, and I'm going back a little bit, Governor Gordon sends his best to you. He's a past chairman of the WGA. I know he wishes he could be here, and I'm the very poor substitute. But frankly, what makes a difference on permitting, on how we get things done, starts at the top, and it starts with attitude. Governor Gordon more than once says his favorite conjunction is and. We can have transmission and wildlife. We can have development and recreational opportunities. So I think that's where it starts. And it's one of the things that I believe he does extremely well. And one of the advantages in Wyoming is, one, you may know we don't have a lot of people, which means we don't have a very large bureaucracy. But the disadvantage is we don't have a lot of people to do the work. So it really comes down to an attitude and a way to actually to try to get to yes. So that's where I would start. It starts at the top. It starts with leadership. States have a great advantage, I believe, over the federal government in doing this. In that normally, again, you're dealing with a smaller, state workforce. You have a workforce that I think really usually better understands the goals of, rather it be the governor, the legislature. They're all a part of it. And again, they're searching ways. We heard this on the first panel too. There are ways to cooperate. There are ways to start working with each other. And I'm just going to underline at the end of this part, early, early, early. The earlier you come in to talk to a state regulator, the earlier you talk to landowners, the earlier you talk with NGOs representing, environmental groups, the earlier you talk to people who know sage grouse. Now, if you're in Wyoming, you know how important sage grouse are or are not, depending on how you look at it. I will tell you, I do enjoy hunting sage grouse, and my favorite recipe for sage grouse is to take the bird, right, season it with salt, pepper, and a little bit of cumin, roast it, or on a cedar plank, and after that, throw the bird away and eat the plank. So with that, again, early, early, early. Thank you, Janea.
Welcome. And then last but certainly not least, Brant Johnson from Grid United. So I'll let you do your brief intro and then I'll ask you a question.
Yeah, great. I don't know how to follow that.
Don't have a recipe for us?
I haven't eaten sage grouse yet. Yeah, I'll come to you. We have a project in Wyoming. So I'm Brant Johnson. I work for Grid United. Grid United is an independent transmission developer. The company started in 2021 at the interest and behest of our owner, who decided that he wanted to do something with the grid, trying to get across those seams. We all talk about the seams for years and years. Winter Storm Uri kind of highlighted that in Texas, so they said, let's go see what we can do. So I joined Grid United when it started. By profession, I was a lawyer for 25 years in Houston, Texas. Worked on pipelines almost my entire career. So long linear infrastructure is what I've been up to for almost all my career, working in environment and land. Really, those are the two big pieces, and then the infrastructure stuff associated with that, regulatory work and permits. So transferring that knowledge to transmission, I think, was pretty seamless. People in my company sometimes say, well, it's so different from pipelines. It really isn't. It's exactly the same. It's just linear infrastructure, it's easements, it's stakeholder work. It's all the same stuff. And it's super complicated and it's very difficult. And you can have your projects killed. I worked on projects that were controversial in the pipeline space and very challenging things. So when we started working at Grid United, I got lucky, and they said, well, we want you to have two endpoints. You can go from Montana to North Dakota, and then you design a process to get there. That's great. After 25 years of fighting with people and figuring out how eminent domain doesn't work, and all of the things that I wish the engineers didn't do before they gave me the route to go pursue. We got a chance to design a process to go out and do things what we thought would be the right way, in a way that would take risk off of the table and hopefully move things quickly. So that's kind of where we focused. I think most of our work has been exactly like was talked about in framing up this discussion, not so much about permitting reform. We have people in our company that definitely work on permitting reform. Having been around for a while, didn't want to have anything to do with permitting reform. I've lived through that multiple times and seen lots of elections and had my projects started and stopped and canceled and rewritten and all of that. So wanting to work within the existing infrastructure not taking any shortcuts, really leaning into just how to do it in a way that would facilitate getting a permit and knowing what that meant up front and then doing the stakeholder work in order to get there. So that's kind of what we did, and happy to dive deeper on that as we go.
Yeah, sounds great. And you do have practical experience working with the SITAP process, which tries to lay out a lot of what you've just spoken about. So maybe just spend 1 minute telling folks what SITAP is, just in case they don't know. But then my question for you would be, how can developers and states ensure that the SITAP process is fully utilized to avoid duplicative reviews? Yes, so that's the question.
Great. So SITAP, if you're not familiar with it, it's RJ is going to have to help me.
And I can help you.
Coordinated interagency permitting program. Gotcha. So the idea is a coordinated interagency thing where you can get all of the people working together and have it swept up into one head, and the DOE is your lead agency. Big challenge for us, as with every big project, is who is going to be the lead agency. If you've got multiple federal agencies involved, it's a game of hot potato. Who doesn't want it the most? And that was starting to happen when we started doing this, and everybody is, for good reasons, thinking, wow, our office is not staffed to really handle a 450-mile project. We know what that's going to look like, all the headaches that come along. So you get shuttled around, and who doesn't want to do the work for good reasons. So what we wanted to make sure that we did was work with one federal lead. And how could we do that? In our case, we were able to find existing authority that the DOE already had to coordinate the preparation of an environmental document. Sorry for being a lawyer on you there, but they had existing authority under the Federal Powers Act, and we just kind of leaned into that existing authority. We kind of got started on a pipeline model where FERC has siting authority for pipes, and they have a pre-filing process that kind of works. We wanted to really push that stakeholder work forward and really lean into that concept. So it kind of lined up well with what DOE was trying to do at the time. We got a very talented manager for our project for the SITAP program. She sits right over there, and now she works for us because there was an election. So about the time we got rolling on SITAP and it was going really well, then there was election and a big bunch of turnover. Then you cross your fingers again and see what's going to happen. Are they going to do away with this? Well, they didn't. It's a really good program. This first project that we're doing was kind of a test case for the idea, and then the real program started up, and our second project, which is in Wyoming, is really going through that process now. So happy, any of us that are sitting here from Grid, we've got a few of us are happy to talk about the program. Big fans of it. I think that if we lean into it, the whole idea behind SITAP was to push forward a lot of the stakeholder work that we're talking about, so you get good information going in to your permitting. By the time you get to an NOI, you've done a lot of work already to make sure that you're not creating the types of problems that bog down big projects.
Yeah, and NOI is a notice of intent, which is what kicks off the federal process. Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for highlighting that. And I wanted to pick up on an example of early and often and good communication and being able to permit something relatively quickly, which is the 10 West transmission line in Arizona. It's a 125-mile long line. It's about 500 kV. And one of the things that the Arizona Bureau of Land Management and the Arizona State did together was pull all the data together. So they're looking at the same data at the same time, was to work with all of the stakeholders early and often and continuously throughout the process. And we're able to get that one done, I think, in a little bit under 3 years within the permitting, which is not as fast as we would like to go, but faster than some of the transmission lines. And it's been constructed, and it's actually carrying electrons right now as we speak. And so a lot of times just being able to pick up on and use in a very focused and smart way the tools that we already have, and holding people accountable. If we said we were going to have something done by October 28th at 2 o'clock, we've got to have it done by October 28th at 2 o'clock, and everybody works together to help make those different deadlines that go along with it. So it's just an example of, I think, really great collaboration with the federal government, the state, the community, the developer to get through the permitting process in a very expeditious way. So let's see, let me keep going with my questions, and I'll go back to James, and I will pick up a little bit on this idea about collaboration. And so I'm wondering what your take is on how can states and developers collaborate on early engagement and the benefits agreements to avoid some of those downstream conflicts?
Yeah, thanks. So while Colorado doesn't have a formal process like CTAP designating a lead agency, I would say that of my 10 years of experience with the state government, the last few years have really seen a much more collaborative approach under the leadership of Governor Polis, as well as the directors of all of our offices. You know, we've worked closely, the energy office has worked closely certainly with DNR, as I mentioned before, the Department of Natural Resources on this siting study and other parts of Senate bill, the DOLA as well as part of that. Just last year, we worked closely with CDOT on transmission right of way on the highways, along with Randy Satterfield, who you'll hear from later this afternoon with Next Gen Highways, and even working with Office of Economic Development and International Trade. So I think that collaborative approach has been really, really helpful. And in terms of, and I think developers have recognized that we do have a collaborative approach here in the state. Also, you'll hear quite a bit here from Maury Galbraith this afternoon, who's a panelist and a moderator for our next two sessions, who's the director of the Colorado Electric Transmission Authority. And I feel very fortunate to represent CEO on the board of CETA, and I think that there's great potential for CETA to play that role moving forward on really kind of coordination and making sure that everyone within the state government, developers, and our local communities understand the importance of transmission siting and permitting and moving forward to make sure we get transmission built, because it's been a very siloed process here in the state over the where each utility has their own specific transmission planning processes, filing informational dockets at the PUC without being litigated. So I think there's a lot of steps that our state can continue to work on to make sure that we are planning the right transmission and then getting it permitted as quickly as we can.
Sounds great. And then Randall, I'm wondering, what are some successful examples from Wyoming when you were coordinating permitting reviews across multiple jurisdictions, trying to keep that transparency there, keep the accountability there? Would love to hear some stories from you about that.
Absolutely. And as a reformed politician, I do know that I don't have to answer your question. But I'm going to.
Appreciate you.
Yeah, I absolutely. Some of the things that we have found have worked really relatively well in Wyoming. As early as 2012, the state actually put out a guide to transmission projects, of how to get them permitted through the state process as well as the federal process. So at least you had a document that applicants could immediately look at, get an idea of timeframes, get an idea of the process that has to be. I would recommend that if many of you probably already have them, but it certainly is very, very useful. In addition, we have a call about every 6 weeks with our Department of Environmental Quality, but also the Bureau of Land Management. I mean, I just heard Wyoming referred to as an energy colony in this last, panel. I can't really let that pass, right? But it is true. It is. We produce 12 times more energy than we produce. And so we actually want to lean into that and take advantage of that. But back to this coordination call, the reason why we have BLM and the Fish and Wildlife Service, as well as the Game and Fish, is Wyoming's about 48% federally owned. So even on a transmission project, There are very few places in the state that you're not going to have the combination of private landowners, possibly state sections, and certainly federal sections as well. So that we have found those calls to be just invaluable because it actually gets us an idea of what's in the queue, what looks like it's coming first, and what projects we're hearing that might be having, relatively difficulties. In our Department of Environmental Quality, although it's not transmission, but it deals with others, there's an ombudsman that actually help project sponsors work through the process. And then last of all, we are serious about taking less time. I was going to say taking less time than the federal government, but that's a pretty low bar. You talked about permitting in 3 years for a transmission line. We have one that originated in Wyoming, 12 years for permitting. So, but that's that's where states can lead. That's where we can hopefully work with the federal government. This administration is certainly open to ideas. We're interested in where we can. What can states do? What part of NEPA can states do? Usually states can do it faster. Now, the kick to that is we think the federal government should back us up because usually there's litigation whenever you get through a NEPA process. So with that, I will, the only other thing I would mention that's been very useful at the local level, several years ago, Wyoming created what was known as the Federal Natural Resources Policy Account. And it's an appropriations generally about $1 million per biennium, but those funds are available to to local counties, conservation districts, so that they can participate more easily in that NEPA process. They're able to go out, get the studies they need, the studies they want. So once again, we've involved the local people as well, which ends up and, overall just speeds up the process. So thank you.
Yeah, welcome. Thank you. Brant, a question for you is, so you're hearing a lot here about some state-led initiatives, and how can the state-led initiatives help build developer confidence, accelerate investment, and are there things that you'd like to see the states take on in this space?
Sure. I think that the ombudsman is a great idea. I think the list of what to do, a little roadmap is nice. We've had some experience with that in Wyoming. They were a very friendly office to go into and get an initial meeting with and just talk pragmatically about what to do. Yeah, okay. I'll make sure that I go there and stay away from yours. Yeah, and I think that and we've had similar experiences in Colorado. In Montana, they've got an interesting program where you have they've been able to work with the federal agency and share the scoping work and some of the drafting work of NEPA to meet the state process. So those are kind of synced up and they share a third-party contractor. So that saves some expense and also saves some time. So you've got you don't have multiple scoping meetings and you're kind of all synced up. That's been pretty nice. So when the states are kind of working with the federal partners like you talked about, and in the Montana case, in particularly synced up fashion, that's very nice. I think that in North Dakota, another example, when we went and talked with them at the very beginning, they kind of laid it all out and said, hey, we actually mean it. Stakeholder work, don't come to us until you've got all your county permits for your state permits. Like, all right, well, that's very clear. And then you talk to the counties, don't come to us until you've got 80 or 90% of the landowners signed up. I thought that was great too. So, so when they really mean get out there in front of your stakeholders, and then we will kind of work with you if you do that. That's been very helpful. So I think we've heard a lot about what stakeholder work looks like, or what it should look like. In practicality, if you go do all of that work, it costs a lot of money. You spend a lot of time. You want to make sure that you're actually going to be rewarded for doing good work. So I think that's another thing that states can really do is help people, yes, talk about stakeholder work, but what does that actually look like? So having some actual metrics has been pretty nice.
Great. I think that it's really exciting for us to have this initiative, right, for energy superabundance, and to be talking about the transmission that we need to unlock the energy superabundance that we are all striving for together. And so I would ask this question of all three of you, which is, and states are leading the way, right? So how can our governors and our state agencies partner with each other, whether it's with each other or with federal land managers? It doesn't necessarily have to be through SciTap, but the idea is, I think, a good one where you have a schedule. You have the same data that everyone's looking at. You have all the parties who need to look at the data, and they know when they're supposed to be looking at it. So you put an MOU with some teeth on it, right, in this kind of space? But how can the governors and state agencies partner with each other and federal land managers through MOUs or other tools to help synchronize the NEPA and the state reviews? And I can go back down this way or this way, or
I just kind of just talked about it, but yeah, in the case of Montana, they did have an MOU that was very clear up front. This is how we're going to work together. This is the schedule. We have weekly calls with everybody on those calls, and we stay synced up and drive a schedule. So yeah, I completely endorse the MOU idea and getting things up front. You don't need new laws to do that. You just need people talking to each other.
Thank you. And you know, one of the nice things about being in the governor's office is when you get, you can ask other people to do your job, right? And frankly, I think it's the next panel. You're going to hear from John Jenks from the Wyoming Energy Authority. And he certainly, it was very helpful to remind me of things that I should bring up. But one kind of a different concept is the governors of Utah, Wyoming, and Idaho entered into we call it an energy compact. Where the three states have agreed to actually work with each other on the overall one. Transmission is the big issue. It was, I think, ideally directed towards nuclear, but we, being a coal and otherwise state, are taking a slightly different tack. And I see Adam Stewart is here, and I have volunteered several times to help me tell him what Utah needs from Wyoming. But at the moment, he's been just a little bit recalcitrant on it. But I continue to hopefully work through that process. Where again, if you look at a three-state, all going in the same direction, that's how we're going to hopefully help to address. All three states are very interested in data centers, like everyone else in the world right now. Data centers are apparently interested in those three states. And again, that is just one example how we coordinate, all sources of energy. Each state has something that they want to do. And I think that's one of the other things as we talk about. I mean, if I could change the world, it would be that, all states become somewhat energy source agnostic, meaning you're not blocking another state's energy because you may not like it. But it's still electrons. States do want to provide energy to other states. And I think while I'm at it, I'm going to say what is, I think, hurting overall is we really need to rethink the way regulated utilities have been operating. It just that model really no longer probably fits what we're looking at right now. You heard large load in the last load, I think, in the last panel. I think you're also going to hear about third-party generation. I think we're in for an absolute regulatory change on how we look at utilities and how they deliver services. So thank you.
yes, James.
Yeah, so don't have any real direct experience working with states on MOUs, but it's been this past few years has been a great learning experience through a couple of different organizations. Both CREPC was mentioned earlier as part of the Western Interstate Energy Board, which has been a fascinating way to learn about what other states are doing and lessons learned. NASIO has been doing a lot of great work for our energy office staff. Of course, NARUC on the Utility Commission side. So those are all really helpful ways for us to learn about best practices. The report, one thing I did forget to mention early on in the final version of the report did not contain recommendations by the state, but it did list a series of policy options. And these were recommended to us by our stakeholders, as well as looking to what other states have done. And I had great conversations with energy offices from states across the country, particularly in the West, about the lessons learned from their efforts at reforming siting and permitting for clean energy projects and transmission. So that's really my experience.
Yeah, this is really fantastic. I was joking with my panelists when we did our prep call that we could talk about this all afternoon, but we don't get all afternoon to talk about it. But I put a couple chicken scratch notes. I'm going to try to read them off to you all really quickly before we before we open it up for questions. But I think some of the themes that you heard us talk about here are the need to collaborate early and often with all of the parties. Early and often, keep going to talk to them. I wrote down early. I wrote that we need to lend our expertise to some of the counties or other local jurisdictions that don't have all of the resources that they may need to take on something as complex as a hundreds-mile long transmission line. And in addition to lending some expertise there may be ways where we could put together, I think it was, you said, a federal natural resources account where there's some funds that go to help build that expertise and open up that capacity for folks to work together. We talked about having an ombudsman, and that might be helpful, having people on the same page, right? We're working on the same project in the same timeline with the same data, working to get to an answer together. We heard also putting together a guide to the process is really helpful for folks. So they come in, they already know what you'd like them to do because you've put a guide together for them, and that it starts at the top with your attitude. And so that's just a very, very fast summary of what we heard from our excellent panelists. And I think, I just wanted to flag, we wanted to talk a little bit about what can states do, what can the lead that states can take, especially under this governor's initiative, and just, highlight that the progress doesn't hinge on having new laws. It hinges on this leadership and coordination that you're hearing folks right up here on the panel with me talk about. States and local governments already have the authority to convene the stakeholders early and often align the timelines and build trust. And they're doing that. They're doing it really well, right? So when these elements can come together, transmission development should hopefully become not just faster, but it'll be smarter and fairer and more durable. So I look forward to the continued collaboration of all of us on the panel and also here in the room on working on these things together. And I'd like to, we're going to take questions and then we'll thank the panel, but please join me in thanking James and Lester and Brant for the excellent conversation. It's been fantastic. And I think we have about 10 minutes for questions, so I'm happy to take some questions. No, we're ready.
Stunned.
Yeah, oh my gosh. No questions for us? Oh, here's one. Bless you.
I'm Clayton Barrows from the National Renewable Energy Lab. So you've all talked about permitting as it relates to transmission. I'm curious about what you think the role of permitting and permitting reform can be to alleviate the bottlenecks associated with integrating large loads. Specifically, what I'm thinking about is that we've talked a little bit about adding on-site generation resources, and I'm aware that even some of those that operate under the control of the large load owner or operator, they are also subject to permitting restrictions. How are you guys considering these issues in your permitting processes and reforms, or is this just out there and an issue yet to be addressed?
The only non-regulator, so.
I mean, I'm not a regulator right now, but I do think that when you're looking at project specifics, It's a little bit less complex if it's one project in a smaller space. But a lot of the things that we've talked about, right? The collaboration, working together early and often, making sure you've got all of the data in place, that you know what the process is going to be, can help you get the smaller project isn't the right way to describe it, right? But they're geographically closely located project, right? A lot of these tools that we've been talking about, I think work well in that permitting space for those. Transmission is its own special challenge because it's so many tens or hundreds of miles. It crosses multiple states sometimes, right? And so you just have to bring a lot more jurisdictions, a lot more collaboration together. But I think some of the techniques that we talked about can work for a project that's in a smaller location. But
Yeah, I would just say it's certainly on our radar of things we want to look at. And I think here in the state and along with the country, you are seeing a growing amount of NIMBYism when it comes to data centers. So I think you're seeing some local governments really want to take a pause before they permit any data centers, and maybe they have a place a moratorium or put in land use codes that are pretty restrictive on data centers, like we're seeing from a lot of different type of projects, large infrastructure projects. So I think it's certainly just something on our radar that we really want to be closely watching. And again, like I said earlier, trying to support our local governments as they deal with these brand new issues to them.
I'm a politician. I have to talk, right? No, but I think this is actually, and I had not only alluded to it, I think I hit it maybe a little more directly, is that's where we need to start changing the way we think, the way we've been doing it for generations. I'll tell you, and I'll let you know, John Jenks is the expert on trying to change, how we look at large loads, how we look at third-party generation. But the difficulties with getting transmission lines permitted, that is just going to lead to more pressure in order, for companies that want a power to actually develop their own power sources. And if you want to dip your toe into certificated areas and how important that suddenly becomes to utilities, start talking about, we'll let you just build your own generation, or we'll let you hire somebody to build generation. And then we're going to require the utility to pay any excess electricity that you have. It's just a tough nut to crack, but I think it's one we need to look at, because I believe that is probably going to be somewhat of the wave of the future. As again, we need to figure out how to get energy close, a lot of energy, and quickly.
other questions? Can't see.
I have an
Sarah
elk
around the-
recipe. Are you all interested?
Thanks. Hi, Scott Dunbar. I'm an attorney with Keys and Fox. I'm a public utilities litigator, so permitting is not my bailiwick. But at what point do we as states or as a society decide that transmission is just too important to allow all these different jurisdictions to slow it down? Like, at what point do we decide, you know what, maybe local jurisdictions have no authority or much less authority to permit than they do now, so that we can just get things done? How urgent is it, and when do we get to that point where we just need to say enough is enough, and we need some decisions made on high at the state level?
How about when the lights go out? And I don't mean to be so facetious on that, but it probably will take that almost to that extent. Because again, it's an ingrained industry. States are ingrained. You saw what when FERC was talking about, maybe taking over what most state regulatory commissions do. You saw that within the last couple of years. It's going to take a little more than what we have right now. I don't think it's the best answer that we have to face that. But unfortunately, I think we will have to see some energy crunches before we actually see the will for people to, okay, let's get this becomes a national priority. and that gets the feds as well.
Maybe, it's a great question. That's the only reason we exist, is because it is so hard. And, if you're trying to build a cross seams project from a regulatory perspective, it's challenging to do that because you're trying to prove up a benefit to ratepayers across a interregional line where you only have ratepayers on one side. So the complexities of markets and the complexities of having regulatory risk, before you go and build a project, to try and do stakeholder work like we've done has been very expensive to do. We anticipate that all of our project will be owned by regulated utilities in different slices, in different ownership levels. Each of those regulatory bodies in each of those states has to approve that investment for each of those utilities to invest in our project. So what we are finding, just pragmatically, they're not able to take that risk on the front end, but they're pretty interested in buying a project that's fully de-risked and permitted. But at the end, as you know, you're going to have to prove it up to your state regulatory body that paying that cost is going to be worth it. So I think that there is a great need for it. It's a great question. I don't have a great answer other than if you're going to do it, we have to find ways to make regulatory approval more predictable, and recognize the value of transmission rather than just point to point like we have been. It has to be a bigger picture that this is a broader good.
Yeah, and I would just add, we do somewhat have a model for this with the way that FERC regulates gas pipelines, interstate gas pipelines. And I completely agree with Randall that, it would take severe reliability and outage, and then we'd probably play months and years of the blame game in our current political environment. But that would potentially be the next step. But yeah, it would take something drastic, I think, to move that way.
All right. I think we have time for one more question. If there's one, yep. There is on her way to you.
Hi, I'm Amy Rose from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and I have a question for James. You mentioned that a lot of the offices that need to evaluate and review these applications don't have the workforce capacity. So what have you seen in terms of effective practices and what needs to be communicated, how it should be communicated so that the staff in these offices can evaluate these very complex technical projects?
Yeah, so last year, our office and a variety of other stakeholders went through an application process with the DOE. I don't know if many people are familiar with the RSTEP program, where a series of states were funded to do this type of work, to provide that type of technical assistance for local governments. And that's, unfortunately, we didn't get ours closed in time until the new administration came into power. But that I do think our report identifies that as a potential model moving forward, pending funding. But just providing that, it could be like our code repository, could be best practices, and just kind of a one-stop shop where local governments could find information, could find experts available to them, whether it's like third-party consultants when they're trying to update their land use codes, and things like that. So, I do think there's processes in other states that we would hope to learn from, and if our state can find some funding for that type of project, that's what would be a big goal of ours, and that's something we heard from local governments throughout this process, beginning with the legislation in 2024 up through the filing of the report.
All right. Well, thank you for the great questions. And again, please join me in thanking my excellent panel, James, Randall, and Brant. It was great.